All right, good afternoon, everyone. We've got two senators out sick, and a couple folks are rotating in and out of other committees for their own bill hearings. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Today is Tuesday, March 21st. We have 12 bills on the docket. We're going to start off with Senator McCray with Senate Bill 889. We'll then move on to, I see Senator Benson is here, so we'll move on to Senator Benson with 941 and 942. We'll then go to Senator Gallion at Senate Bill 917. Then we'll go to 894, 904, 927, 933, 944, 949, 961, and then we'll wrap up with Senator Muse at 967. So with that, without further delay, if Senator McCray is here, you're up for Senate Bill 889.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Corey McCray, Senator for the 45th Legislative District. I'm here today to present Senate Bill 889. Mr. Chair, I think that it would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity to thank and welcome my state's attorney, Ivan Bates, who's right here in the crowd. I also see Pastor P.M. Smith, one of the largest churches that I have within my respective district. This isn't my idea, Mr. Chair. I tell you, it's the idea of our newly elected city state's attorney, Ivan Bates. And I didn't take this bill very lightly when hearing about it, but also seeing it. And what happens is our city state's attorney came, he presented the idea, he talked about what the issue was, he talked about the level of the loophole, and then it was introduced over in the House of Delegates. And upon seeing it in the House of Delegates, I thought that it was very important to stand side by side with the state's attorney to let him know that he had support from members of the Baltimore City Senate delegation to move our city forward. I think that it was very clear in reference to the more recent election that we had within Baltimore City that he was very clear and concise in reference to his message and how he was going to go about keeping the citizens of Baltimore City safe. He also clearly communicated that he had one priority, and I'll repeat that again, Mr. Chair, one priority this legislative session, which was House Bill 481, Senate Bill 889. And he said that he wanted to get rid of the respective loophole that exists. And when we look at Maryland state law, we see that individuals between the ages of 18 to 20 caught carrying, transporting, or possessing a firearm can be sentenced to 5 years as a maximum sentence and a $10,000 fine for the first offense. But he looked and he saw that same law said for an individual 1 year older, 21 years of age or older, to only face 3 years maximum sentence and a $2,500 fine. And he questioned, why was that there? I get that we look at things in a holistic way. I felt as though for the last 9 sessions, I've been on the front line from that standpoint, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about voting rights, whether we're talking about food insecurity, transportation, and a vast amount of issues. But at the end of the day, Mr. Chair, I think it's also important that we talk about accountability. And accountability is very important in reference to what's happening within our city with the number of guns. I know the work that you've done around ghost guns and things of that nature. I know the work that this committee has done around ghost guns, but the high amplification with handguns, and not from like legal owners, but from illegal handguns on the streets of Baltimore, across the state of Maryland, is running rampant at this moment. And I just want to say once again that I stand in solidarity with our city state's attorney and with a number of folks from our community that basically said, we want to make sure that we go on a course correction. And I think that that's what that election said. I also ask for a favorable report. Matter of fact, an expeditious favorable report as we go in reference to Senate Bill 889, knowing that we've just passed crossover, but trying our best to make sure that this is sending the right signal to folks back home that we take this as a priority, illegal guns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Senator. We have a couple questions from the committee. Senator Sidnor.
Thank you very much. And I've had an opportunity to speak with the city's state's attorney, and I think parity, it makes sense. But one of the questions that I know I've heard is if there is going to be parity, why are we raising it from 3 to 5 rather than going at 3?
Yep. So Mr. Chair, I think that it would be incumbent upon us, while the city state's attorney is like 2 seconds away from the mic. He is the person that has put forward the bill. I know that this is a sponsor only, but I do think that that is a legitimate question for the city state's attorney.
All right. So I don't want this to devolve into a full-on bill hearing, but so we'll allow state attorneys here. This is a direct question, so it's a legal question that you have someone who can answer that question. So if Mr. Bates, you'd like to come up and answer that question, but if you could deliver the response, just because I don't want it to devolve into a bill hearing, I want to make sure everyone's got a fair opportunity here. So.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Senator Sidner. To me, it's simple. When we sit down, we look at what we're required to do and we're asked to do specifically within the gun violence reduction strategy, some of the strategy that's been written about by Johns Hopkins. One of the things they talk about is bringing individuals in and talking about harsh penalties. Because you have the Justice Reinvestment Act of 2016, a 3-year maximum penalty would only be 8 months potentially incarceration, as opposed to a 5-year penalty would actually be almost 15 months of incarceration. So the harsher penalty would be, i.e. doing local time as the maximum allowable sentence, or the threat or potential of going to division of correction for a few months. Therefore, 5 years allows us, when we bring individuals in, to talk about the gun violence reduction strategy that Baltimore City is spending millions of dollars to implement, and it's showing that it's working. It allows us to say 5 years could be a maximum penalty that they could face. Thank you.
Additional questions for the Senator Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Actually, Senator McCray, you're welcome to answer, but I think my question is really toward Mr. Bates. So welcome, Mr. Bates.
Welcome. Thank you, Senator Carter. Good to see you.
All the intelligence that I've read, including the Johns Hopkins study, indicates that to clear gun violence and the gun problem and the proliferation of guns on our streets, that you have to attack it from both ends, from the trafficking end, the large volume dealer trafficking end, as well as, the individuals. And so I was curious to know what, if any, efforts that your office is engaged in that's dealing with it at the trafficking end, the proliferation of guns on the streets.
Well, exactly. One of the things we did, we've talked to the U.S. attorneys, the federal government, to make sure we focus on that. We're in conjunction and working with a number of strike force units to say that when we do have these individuals, my office has guideline policies. We do not give plea bargains. If you're going to bring illegal handguns, and I've heard the stories of individuals coming with out-of-state tags, going into, unfortunately, some of our disenfranchised neighborhoods, popping the trunk and seeing a number of weapons, and then they know this is happening. We then will go ahead and work with the police, and that we're not going to plea bargain those cases. We're going to hold those individuals accountable to the maximum offense penalty of the law, because I agree that is a humongous issue and a humongous problem. And I understand this bill here would look at the lower level individuals with these illegal handguns, but also I talk about having a path to expunge those records where the individuals bringing those handguns in, those are the individuals we really, really want. And don't be shocked if I don't come back next year with a bill to focus on those individuals as well.
I was like, don't you think we should put it all in the same bill? But I wasn't sure if you were saying the traffickers or the expungement, because I was going to say, that,
oh, no.
That's what we have to do. And I don't know if that is in the bill.
The traffickers. One of the things that I talk about that I will do is, one, if you have an illegal handgun, you're convicted, it's that if you most likely be on probation for 5 years, if you can do probation for 3 years with no new convictions, we'll bring you in, give you a PBJ, and that is how you can expunge your record. And that's what we believe in doing for the individual with the low level, i.e. wear, carry, and transport this handgun.
So my thought is, oftentimes, we say these things and have the best of intentions, but why would we not just put that in the law?
I'm not in the legislature.
I'm just saying, though.
I'm not.
So
if we put that in
but with what you were saying, so one of the things that's really troubled me for a long time, and this committee has several pieces of legislation over the last number of years to track crime guns to their original sources. And all the intelligence indicates that well over half of the guns that are recovered as crime guns on our streets come from other places. I don't believe it's just one individually, like at a time, randomly coming to Baltimore to sell a gun. It's clearly based on all the information from the feds, from ATF and everything. It's about arms dealers that are traffickers that have large volumes. And I think that we have to attack the gun problem in the way we never attacked the drug problem, which is that rather than pick up one individual at a time, knowing that the guns are so plentiful, for everybody you pick up with a gun, there's 10 more out there, 10 more people with guns, 10 more guns. To attack at the top end with the traffickers, the large volume dealers, and work with other states. I believe I read that most of the guns were coming from Virginia that were found in crime guns in Maryland. So I just want to encourage that we work that way. I'm not interested in only targeting young Black people on the streets of Baltimore and saddling them with a criminal record. But I have one more question. Along with the swift and certain penalties that I've heard you talk about, I was wondering, wouldn't it make sense as well to offer or to have some type of required courses like conflict resolution, anger management, or, like we do with DUIs, we have victim impact panels that are required oftentimes for people that are placed on probation. I'm just thinking, I feel like without that, like just locking somebody up, they may or may not learn a lesson, but they haven't learned anything else.
Well, I think that's a good idea. One of the things that I also want to be clear about, I do believe in a wraparound service is extremely, extremely important part of dealing with the handgun, legal handgun epidemic, to make sure individuals have the wraparound services. However, what I'm focused on with this bill deals with the necessity to do something right now to have individuals leave these illegal handguns at home. I think they're in terms of having those conflict resolutions. Like I said, I'm not in the legislature, but maybe that's something you look at in terms of on the educational side to make sure it's a class in schools so that they're trying to get this in the school system before they're already on probation. But, I do think that we have to do all of that to be able to save our communities. Thank you.
Senator Carter, anything else?
Not for now. We can talk offline, Mr. Bates. Thank you very much.
No, Senator, I feel like we didn't want to say, I'll let the vice chair go first, then I'll clean up, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is for the state's attorneys, actually. So I'm a data guy. I think we should be data driven. Some information from, I think the United States Sentencing Commission with some data that I thought was compelling. I was curious if you had seen that data from the Sentencing Commission and how that, what you thought of that data and how that impacts this bill.
Yes, I did see that. I believe that's a report that came out in August or July 2022. It's from the U.S. Sentencing Committee, and I think it's probably, to me, what I view it as one of the most in-depth, comprehensive data reports in terms of looking at the use of illegal handguns, even though it looked at the use of illegal handguns through the federal system. And my interpretation of reading that is a couple things. It looked at whether or not recidivism and length of sentences, they correlate, so to speak. It's kind of said between 0 and less than 5 years, there wasn't a lot in terms of the penalty. But once you got to 5 years, that's when they believe you saw 18% decrease in terms of recidivism record level. Then it talked between 5 years and 10 years, about a 17% decrease in terms of recidivism levels. And then 10 years on up, it dropped to 30%. And so once again, to echo and also piggyback off Senator Sidnor's question, that's why I also believe that 5 years is a magic number, so to speak, because 5 years is when that particular study that has everything correlated. They looked at all the numbers. It looked at almost a 20-year history on the federal side. And what's important about that in the federal sentencing guidelines, there's a PSR where they have all this information for 20 years off every individual that's been involved in the federal system for the past 20 years. And that's why that report to me said 5 years was a magic number. And that to me is also the reason why I think 5 years is the magic number as opposed to 3. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. I know you cited the Sentencing Commission report in your written testimony, along with the support of, I guess, all 24 state's attorneys, the county executive from Baltimore County, the mayor of Baltimore City, and Kwesi Mfume, Congressman Mfume, all support this bill. I guess my question is to the senator and one to the state's attorney is we have this perennial debate over gun violence here in this committee and in the General Assembly. And one of the more frustrating aspects, especially post Bruin, is that there's a lot of focus on the wear carry this year, which I think is a rightful conversation to have. And we had that conversation earlier on this session. I think we can tackle that. We can also tackle illegal firearms as well, that are trafficked and people are using repeatedly in the city and all throughout Maryland. So my question is, for the senator, just since in your time in the House and in the Senate, if you could just speak a little bit to how gun violence in your district, I just speak to your district, your city, has evolved or devolved over the course of our time in office, and we've been in office the same amount of time. If you could just speak to that, and then for the state's attorney, I read somewhere that 56% of the regulated firearms that are used in crime come from out of state. So to Senator Carter's point, our borders are porous, and you do need to deal with the trafficking issue. I guess my question then more on point is this a matter of, you're taking here it's more of a micro approach. Is it a balance between the two, or is this where the more immediate concern is? Because I know that there are short-term operational strategies and then long-term, strategic strategies, with wraparound service and such, but you've got an immediate problem you got to deal with today. So I guess I wonder why you chose this approach first. If you could speak to that. So to the senator first, and then to the state's attorney.
Yep. First, just thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think that during my tenure as our 4 years in the House and then coming over to the Senate, worked very, very hard in reference to the holistic piece of it. I'm proud because we're going to have the first supermarket in East Baltimore, as we've lost to over the tenure that I've been there and going forward. So from a food standpoint, I think about the education piece, and I'm very, very glad of the vote that I took in reference to Kerwin Commission and how we're moving education, in my opinion, in the right direction. I say that having 4 children within our public school system. Then I think about from a transportation system, and we saw the work that we've done around the Transportation Safety Investment Act. I can speak to all of those holistic pieces over and over and over again from that standpoint. But I've also tried my best from a public safety standpoint. I've thought about the police officers and where they live at, and we were able to pass that. I've thought about the efficiency from agency, and we've been able to tackle that piece of it. I've thought about audits within our police department and just talked about some of the guns not being accountable to reporting to the Maryland State Police piece of it. So every step of the way during my 9 years, I've had some level of accountability, whether it's housing, transportation, and things of that nature. But there also has to be accountability both ways, Mr. Chair. There also has to be accountability for the folks that do wear and carry illegally within the streets of Baltimore. There's been an uptick in reference to the handguns, the number of guns that we've been pulling off of the streets of Baltimore. There's been an uptick in reference to the crime that we've been having around our young people, our juveniles. There's been an uptick in reference to just crime in general from that standpoint over the several years that I've been serving in office. So when our state's attorney comes forward and he says that he couldn't find a sponsor within the Senate, I was torn. When he said that this was his only priority that he wanted to put forward, I said I was torn. Knowing that the election that just happened for city state's attorney was very contentious, but the people decided that this was the direction that he wanted to go to. And he was very clear and concise with his message. And seeing the language, I was no longer torn. I do believe that there's a loophole in the law. I think that there are a number of folks that would agree that there's 3 years for one age and 5 years for another age. And I think that we need to move in the direction of one of our folks that are speaking for the public safety within our respective district to move forward. So I get the holistic piece of it, but at the end of the day, the person that's leading public safety, one of the people that's leading public safety in my jurisdiction, when challenges are happening with public safety, I feel compelled to stand next to him and say, hey, this is a moment to lead, and we have to lead in the right direction and send a clear message to the people that's carrying illegal guns across the streets of the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland. Because I think that the city is getting tough, but I'm watching all these other jurisdictions around us also get tough.
Thank you. Senator, great. Mr. Chair, I was a defense attorney for 20 years. Before that, I was a prosecutor. The one thing I really understand is the criminal justice system, not only in Baltimore City, but I've had cases in practically every single jurisdiction around the entire state. And one of the things that I also began to understand when I knocked on over 15,000 doors in Baltimore City is the number one issue I heard time and time and time again. The citizens said they were sick and tired of being sick and tired, and specifically these murders, these illegal handguns. Will this change everything at once? No. But will it be a tool within a toolbox to begin to make that change? Yes. Do I also recognize that we could go after the people bringing the guns in? Yes. But one of the things I recognized from day one, there was an issue within the law. We wanted to make that straight. From day one, the individuals shooting and killing and bringing and murdering individuals aren't necessarily the people bringing in the guns. They're bringing those guns, but the people pulling the triggers, unfortunately, are the people in my city. And being the people in my city, we wanted to act urgently. The citizens of Baltimore City told me they were sick and tired and they needed a fighter. And they needed somebody who was day one was going to come and fight. And that's where I am. And that's why I chose that. So I could fight for the citizens of Baltimore day one who are suffering from the gun crime, who are suffering from the murders, who are suffering from losing their loved ones. Now, I do not think that this battle is going to be over, because to go after guns, bringing it into my state, I need to establish relationships with the state police that help to control those borders, with the U.S. Attorney's Office who also help to control those borders, so that we can work together to focus on that. So this is just one step of the battle. This fight is far from over, but this was the first step. And to me, it's the most important step to make sure individuals know that the system will hold them accountable. And we're doing it in a holistic way. I still believe in that, but I also believe urgency right now is what's needed, and that's why I chose this path.
Got it. Do one more question, then I'll cede back to Senator Carter. And I know this, I don't want this to be provocative, but I thought the statement that you made was provocative, not in the pejorative sense, but in actually, like, it was thought provoking. You kind of drew this distinction between academics and kind of the practical application of what's happening. And one, it just made me think of James Foreman Jr.'s book, Locking Up Our Own, right? And I remember when I got a hold of that book, I read it in one day. I mean, I stayed up all night, I read the book, called him, he came into Baltimore. I found him at BWI. I sat him down, we talked for about an hour and a half. It was a great conversation. And that book has, made a significant impression on me and how I think about these things. And so initially I have a knee-jerk reaction to the types of proposals here. And when you made that comment about the difference between like just kind of practical application and kind of academics, that also made me think, because in this job, there is a difference between people that sit, in our law schools and the people that are on the front lines prosecuting cases. There's a difference, right? And we try to kind of marry the two and to make good policy. And so if you could just speak to that, because a lot of us have that initial allergy to this type of proposal because of books and because of the very sound arguments that James Foreman Jr. made in his book, Locking Up Our Own. He was a prosecutor in Washington, D.C. And so if you could speak to that, because this is kind of what we struggle with every year, is this difference between, because we rely on the academics, we rely on people that are doing this every day. We try to marry the two to have a good policy. And if you could just speak to that, because I thought it was a very important statement you made and it made me think.
Well, like I said, I've been on both sides. And let me say, as a prosecutor, I don't take joy in asking for anybody to go to jail. But I do recognize that we have to have and hold people accountable. And holding people accountable, sometimes some individuals have to sit down, and sitting down may be and is within the jail system. Now, this bill doesn't say everybody goes there, but what the bill says is you still have the discretion, you still have the sentencing guidelines, you still have everything that you do. But what it also says is I've gone to too many funerals. I've gone to too many and watched too many people and young boys and young men and young kids and young ladies who look like me and you that are dying and losing their life. And so I would much rather stop an individual, give them this misdemeanor, have them sit down, think about their actions, then they pull that trigger and it's too late and they've committed a murder. And now I'm sitting there asking for decades in jail. And so it is a struggle, without a doubt. Being a Black man in America as a prosecutor is a struggle. But I also do it because I know I love these kids and I have to hold them accountable I love my community, but I also see my community suffering. And so if it's suffering and I can do something to help it, that's why I've chosen this path. It's not a mandatory minimum. There's still discretion. There's still the argument for the defense attorney to come into court to talk about all the issues, all the problems, all the mitigating factors of why an individual should not why they should not go to jail. It's still also a path to receive a probation before judgment, to change their life, to receive a second chance. But what it also says, the system is sick and tired of being sick and tired, and we will hold you accountable if you do want to carry illegal handguns. After Freddie Gray, I watched guns go dramatically through the roof where everybody was carrying a legal handgun. We have to stop that because that drops down our murder rate.
No, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I know that I want to get Senator Muse and then Senator Carter. You still? Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. And to both of you, I'll come down. Thank you very much for coming. I'll preface what I want to say with this. The Baltimore I see today is not the Baltimore I was born into, in the Baltimore where I lived for most of my life. I'm glad to see Reverend and others who have come down to support you. It is true that if you do the same thing, you'll get the same thing. Expect nothing differently. I think this is an approach that you're taking to say we have to do something. This is something I think that you believe is in a direction that will help to save lives. But I'll ask this, this is a great priority and it's a great start. And I know you've thought about this and you have other priorities that you're looking at. What are at least two of the other major obstacles that you need to tackle in order to really make a dent in the crime stats that are going up? Maybe just two others that we put with this as I talk to people about what we're doing. This is a good start. It's going to do something, but not a lot. It's a good start. And there's two other priorities that you have. And again, Senator Cray, thank you for picking this up. And thank you all for helping all of us to come to some ways that we can help with the problem that is ours too.
Well, for me, I look at two things that I possibly can have some control over. One, excuse me, I'm sorry. Thank you, Senator Muse. I look at two things. I'll try to be pretty brief. One, I look at the police department. I have to have a better working relationship in which we have to better train officers to not have the constitutional violations so that we can implement the laws constitutionally fairly and the community can believe and trust in the police department. Again. And number two, I have to have better trained prosecutors to make sure they can spot those constitutional violations and they can prepare the cases so that Baltimore City jurors who've had those experiences with the police department for many years can then say guilty and hold individuals accountable. Once we're able to go ahead and get the system to work on our end, those are things that we can control. Then we take the laws and we're able to implement the laws in a way that you have written them. And so for me, those are two things that are super important.
And I'll close with this. I know we're tending to look at Baltimore, but it's not just Baltimore. We have it in my county, Prince George's County. It's in many different places. What helps one helps us all. What affects one affects us all. And so I pray for all of us who are all looking for answers on how to get a handle on this. And thank you all for that beginning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, it's certainly a state problem, not a city problem.
That's
It's
right.
Every jurisdiction.
Correct.
All right, Senator Carter.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. I don't want to belabor this, but the Chairman Smith really better articulated some of the things that I was feeling about this. And Senator McCray spoke about the proliferation of guns. You've mentioned it multiple times. So I'm going to have to go back to this idea of trafficking and large volume dealers. Because if it is about the proliferation and for everybody that you lock up, there's 10, 50 more, right, guns where that came from. I know that this alone is not a solution. And I'm wondering, why would not the focus be the proliferation of guns before it is the individual only, who then, once they get the conviction and record, is then handicapped from being able to participate in society in legal enterprise?
Well, a couple things. And I understand the big picture, trying to stop the guns from coming in. That also involves the relationships and working with that. However, at the end of the day, it is the community that is suffering from those individuals who often live in that community with those handguns pulling those triggers. And you can always argue they wouldn't get those, but for them getting the guns from the outside. I understand that. But also, we're also starting to see is a number of handguns from robberies, from burglaries, things like that that are happening. We see also guns going from one individual. That is something that with the ATF we've learned about Nyberg. With Nyberg, we can go ahead and follow the handgun from one person through the entire crew that may live on the east side or west side, and how it's being used in one crime after another crime after another crime. And so it is a couple things. One, we need to do something right now, this very second, in reference to these individuals that are pulling the trigger. That's what this bill potentially does, but also it makes the law fair across the board for everybody. It does a couple of things, but that does not mean and does not prohibit us from coming back after we've spent the time understanding how individuals are bringing guns into this state and having additional laws next year where I come back before the General Assembly. We can sit down, we can work on a joint bill where we focus on tackle that problem together. I would welcome that, Senator Carter.
You mind, also, I don't share the belief that length of sentence is the most significant deterring factor in illegal action. And you just mentioned, robbery, burglary, and of course, homicide, which are terrible, terrible problems. But from my experience as a resident and a defense attorney, primarily in Baltimore, I have found over the course of my career that so often state's attorneys don't pursue the burglary or the robbery or the very serious crime because they know they can get a guarantee if they can show that there was a gun and the gun was operable or whatever. So my question is, how does this help solve those? And what is the conviction rate or the police clearance rate? Because I know it never has been very good in Baltimore in the last number of years, but also the effort to go after the real crime, the underlying felony or violent crime ought to be the goal more than just, hanging your hat on the gun.
Well, this is just one of the tools in the toolbox to fight the crime. If a person's charged with robbery, then unless there was a gun used, it most likely would be handgun and commission crime of violence. And then they're looking at the minimum of 5 without the possibility of parole. So this law wouldn't even apply. This law is for the individual that is on the cusp of saying, you know what, let me just put my gun in my pocket and go out in the community. That is an individual that has made a choice that, you know what, I'm not necessarily a criminal per se, but I'm carrying this gun. This individual who now may be angry, who now may be upset, who then pulls out that handgun and pulls that trigger without having a full appreciation of consequences, now murders an individual based on an argument. Now, instead of looking at a few months, now they're looking at decades in jail. That's where you'd see this potential law being used, that particular individual. But once again, you still have the sentencing guidelines. Nothing has changed. You still now have the opportunity to have a universal law that treats 18 to 20-year-olds the same as it does 21 and above the same. But you also have a defense attorney, such as yourself, who's going to make all those arguments and mitigation to the court why this individual is different and should not ever receive a 5-year sentence. That's what it does. It doesn't change anything other than gives us another tool from the toolbox, allows us to sit down and handle the cases in a way in which everybody has the opportunity to be treated similar or the same, and also allows us to sit down and say this is a potentially more harsh penalty. So before you grab the handgun, you can think about this as well. That's what the researchers said we need to do, and especially with the GVRS.
Thank you. One more question, Mr. Chair, please. Earlier in session, we had this conversation. I asked if there was any data on the ratio of arrest versus conviction and the ratio of the 3-year sentence upon conviction versus the 5-year sentence. I know that you're new to the office, and so you may not have acquired that, but I'm wondering if you had any actual data on conviction rate and for both levels of sentence, the 3-year and the 5-year.
I do not. And every jurisdiction is different. Some jurisdictions automatically only call the 5 years on one, some don't. Like, for instance, I can tell you, we recently had a conviction in a murder case where a husband of a police officer was killed by a young person was 18 at the time. And because they were 18 to 20, they were charged with a 5-year offense and found guilty of second-degree murder. So based on the offenses, they're facing an additional 5-year penalty because of that gun, potentially 65 years, as opposed to if they were 21, they would be only facing 63 years. And so to me, you have to also ask yourself the question, the crime itself is horrendous, but is it fair because this individual faces more time because they're under 21, as opposed to another person who did that same crime would be facing less time because they're 21 or above? So to me, that's a perfect example of why this law at 5 years is needed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Senator McCray. Mr. State's Attorney, thank you both very much. Thank you. All right, with that, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 889. We'll now move on to, I said I was going to move on to Senator Benton with Senate Bill 941. I see that Senator King is here as well, so we'll move her up. But Senator Benton, then Gallion, and King.
Nine, 4, 1. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Wallstrom, and members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. I'm here to present Senate Bill 941, Correctional Services, Inmates, Labor, Job Training, and Educational Courses. The United States of America has the highest incarcerated rate in the world. The jail system currently serves more than a form of punishment for wrongdoing than a tool for rehabilitation, which has been shown to raise the recidivism rate in America. Recidivism is vastly lower in other countries with the same crime rate as the United States. And that is due to their focus on prison reform, which encompasses inmate labor wages, job training, educational courses, along with many others. The average hourly rate of income for inmates in the United States is 52 cents per hour. Let me repeat that. The average hourly rate of income for inmates in the United States is 52 cents per hour. Picture working for hours in harsh conditions and still not be able to afford the bare minimum essentials, such as toothpaste, body wash, lotion, and not to mention food. This bill will enforce better working conditions and wages for inmates, higher quality job training, and exceptional educational courses to afford inmates the opportunity to be contributing members upon release in society. Many of us don't recognize that some of these inmates will be returning. And if they don't have the proper skills, if they don't have any hope, they will end up by going back to prison. And so this legislation prohibits the compensation rate for inmate labor in Maryland correctional enterprises from being less than a minimum wage under the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. It will require the Division of Corrections to offer, subject to safety and security concerns, job skills training, and educational courses to all inmates. It is essential that inmates re-enter society with skills, knowledge, and understanding of how our economy functions to be able to contribute and lessen the chance of going back to prison. Thus, I respectfully urge the committee to give a favorable report to Senate Bill 941. You know, I've had the opportunity to go up to Western Maryland, Sharpsburg Pike, and visit the correctional facility where furniture and other items are made. And you only have to see the work of these inmates to understand how important this bill really is. It's pretty shameful that we have these inmates working, producing furniture, meat, all kinds of wonderful things that the great state of Maryland sends out, and they make millions of dollars on the backs of these little inmates whose hourly wage is 52 cents per hour. That's pretty shameful. So I am hoping that you all will give serious consideration to this bill, Senate Bill 941. And at some point in time, this committee might want to consider a visit to the facilities where furniture and meat and some of the most wonderful things are happening with these inmates who are so talented and gifted, but only make 52 cents an hour. That's unbelievable during this day and time. So thank you very much for that. And I ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 941.
Thank you very much, Senator. Questions from the committee? No, you're absolutely right, Senator. The Department of Corrections makes some fantastic furniture. Almost all the furniture here in the General Assembly is made there, and almost all the frames hanging on the walls are made from them.
Okay.
High quality stuff. All right. Single
Senate
question.
Bill 942.
Yes, ma'am. Let's just close out this hearing. That'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 941. When I move on to Senate Bill 942, Senator Benson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. I'm here to present Senate Bill 942, Health and Wellness Standards, Correctional Facilities. When people think of prison food, they usually do not feel enticed to eat it. In fact, they feel the opposite, and it's for good reason. The same food brands that supply food to prisons also supplies food for schools. If the fact that all jail food is provided in places where your children go to school every day bothers you, it should bother you that people in prison who are other people's children consume it as well. People who are incarcerated are 6 times more likely to contract foodborne illnesses than the general population due to the poor standards of health and wellness in correctional facilities. The food consumed by incarcerated individuals are high in salt, sodium, and sugar, which elevates the risk of diabetes and heart failure in this population. An alarming 47% of African Americans in the United States are diagnosed with cardiovascular disease. So it is vital to note that African Americans make up a large portion of the prison and jail populations, putting them at risk for severe health complications. This legislation requires the Secretary of Public Safety and Correctional Services, with the advice of the Secretary of Health, to update the minimum mandatory standards for incarcerated individuals' food services. It also requires updates at least every 5 years thereafter, and will establish a correctional facilities and health and wellness pilot program. This program will take charge in establishing the minimum mandatory standards for inmate food services. 4 state correctional facilities will be selected by the Secretary of Public Safety and Correctional Services, who will report specific information to the Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities and the General Assembly. Finally, the Secretary of Health must set health and wellness standards for the pilot program. These efforts will improve the health and quality of life of individuals who are incarcerated. Therefore, I'm respectfully asking that this committee issue a favorable report for Senate Bill 942. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Senator. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. All right, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 942. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Always good to see you. All right,
Same here. Thank you.
next, Senator Gallion with Senate Bill 917, and then we'll move on to Senator King.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of Judicial Proceedings Committee. For the record, Senator Jason Gallion here representing District 35, Harford and Cecil counties. Now, 4 years ago when I first came to the Senate, I believe the first bill that I presented was in this committee. And it went all the way through and passed. And this is the first time I've been back. So it's been 4 long years, but I'm batting 1,000. I hope we can keep that going, with this bill. Senate Bill 917 authorizes the fire police of each volunteer fire company that they may have their privately owned vehicles equipped with red and white lights. In Maryland code, the fire police members can only activate their emergency lights when they are stationary and or parked at the scene. By allowing red and white lights, this will help alert oncoming traffic rather than have all the red lights blending into each other. So basically it helps with visibility. Right now, they just have red. This will break it up, allow red and white. It actually is a safety issue, will help our fire police. Just from personal experience in the volunteer fire service, I was a chief of the volunteer fire company there in Level for 6 years. Fire police are picking up the slack sometimes when we're waiting for other law enforcement to get there. You could have a wreck and traffic is, there could be a traffic wreck and you have your medic, your rescue unit are working on getting a patient extricated out of a car and put into the ambulance for transport. These fire police show up and they can redirect traffic. They can close down the road or give you a safe space to work. So their job is really important job to help the safety of our volunteer fire and EMS personnel. Also wanted to mention the cross-file this bill sponsored by Delegate Stein passed the House unanimously. And I respectfully ask the committee for a favorable report on Senate Bill 917. Thank you.
Senator McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill. While I am not a member of the fire police, I am kind of like their mascot. And everything that the senator did say, especially in the rural areas, it is needed, and appreciate you bringing the legislation, sir.
Glad to do it.
Excellent. Transportation article. I never understand why we have to do this, but I'm glad you brought it forward. So, seeing no further questions from the committee, thank you very much, Senator. Thank you. Look forward to supporting it. All right. So with that, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 917. We'll now move on to Senator King with Senate Bill 894. Senator King, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It has been over 15 years since the legislature took a comprehensive look at the laws, regulations, and issues surrounding the common ownership communities. Senate Bill 894 will create the Task Force on Common Ownership Communities and require the task force to look at the issues facing these communities, as well as taking a fresh look at current practices and how they are impacted communities. Mr. Chairman, you have worked with me many years with so many different bills that have been presented on for these HOAs, and I think it probably is a good time now to take a look at it. The House bill passed with several amendments on it. We agree with all the amendments. It kind of just streamlined it a little bit and made it less prescriptive. So we would go along with whatever amendments the House has put on.
Thank you, Senator. I'll look to council. Council, are we in receipt of the amendments? Is that Shamari's bill? Are we in receipt of the House amendments? If not, we'll get on it, but appreciate it. Questions for the senator from the committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. So with that, that'll end Senate Bill 894. And Senator McKay, you're up next. Before you take the podium, I'll pass it over to the Vice Chair real quick for a quick announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator McKay, if you want to get your witnesses ready, but I would not object. We didn't have a floor session today, so I wanted to introduce a guest here in the committee. Her name is Laura Stewart. Many of you know her. She is a precinct official in my legislative district, a friend and a supporter, and a fierce advocate on behalf of our children and the right to an adequate public education here in Maryland. So please welcome Laura Stewart.
Welcome. Yeah, nice JPR welcome. Good to see you, Laura. Sure. Oh, see, look what you started, Jeff. All right.
I have to do this
Go ahead,
one.
Senator Muse.
I served on the finance committee when I was here for a while, and I don't know if you saw him, but I see with us, and he would not want me to do it, but I have to do it because he did such a good job for many, many years. Senator Matt Middleton, who is chair of Finance Committee, and I had the privilege of serving with him for many years, and it's just good to see you here very much, and thank you for that, for allowing it.
All right, excellent. So then you're gonna forget the other senator sitting next to you? The other former senator sitting next, it's PJ Hogan, oh, come on, go ahead, show some more love and then we'll get
Yeah,
on.
I
With
couldn't
life.
see him because of the podium, because he's so short. But anyway, I can see you now. Good to see you. I had a wonderful time serving with them for a long, long time, and welcome back. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
So you see how we treat former senators here. All right, Senator McKay, all right, we'll get the show on the road now. Senate Bill 933.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I do appreciate, while it wasn't a standing ovation, but all the claps of me presenting Senate Bill 933. This bill allows motorcyclists to have a personal responsibility for their safety and creating the specific criteria for adults regarding whether they wear a helmet. Now, the individual must be 21 years old and either have been licensed to drive a motorcycle for at least 2 years, completed the motorcycle safety course that has been approved by the state of Maryland, or is a passenger on a motorcycle being driven by individuals already meeting the previous mentioned criteria. A couple bullet points, if you would, please. This has the backing of the AMA, the American Motorcycles Association, ABATE of Maryland. Mandatory helmet laws do not prevent crashes, nor does it prevent injuries. Education and better skills are the best measure to reduce accidents. Note that Mississippi has had a mandatory helmet laws and yet has the highest Mississippi has mandatory helmet laws, but yet has the highest death rate of motorcyclists in the nation. Both Delaware and Pennsylvania do not have mandatory laws, and Pennsylvania is one of the lowest accident rates. Only 0.96% of all registered motorcyclists get into an accident each year in 2021. If I could have my supporters stand up. Thank you. They have been coming here year after year after year after year. And I would like to tell you that this year we are presenting this bill to you in the honor of Gary Pappy Bauer, a friendly face in Annapolis from the 1980s up until the day he passed a few years ago. He was a gentleman who had a big white beard, if you would remember Pappy. He was an actual constituent of mine, and I would see him every Friday night at the Clear Spring Diner when I would come back. I went and saw his widow, who really just could not come down to support because it's still a tragedy and the loss that we have lost. So I proudly present this here to you today. I ask for a favorable report, and maybe this year we could actually maybe study and get everyone together. We could call it a Senator West conference call where we could get everybody on both sides of the issue to work out what would be a compromise. So thank you for hearing me out. Thank you all for coming down and honoring my friend and yours, Pappy Bauer. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator, and thank you all for coming down here today. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you all very much. Thank you, Senator McKay. And with that, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 933. We'll now switch to the Vice Chair, Senator Waldstreicher, with Senate Bill 927, followed by Senate Bill 944.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For those of you who were here last year, there was a bill related to the relationship between towers who tow commercial vehicles, meaning the 18-wheelers, and the truckers, the independent truckers, for whom these vehicles are their primary asset. And a reference was made to the Finance Committee, and what this committee did last year was essentially to Mac Middleton this, to say, you guys go away, figure this out, come to consensus, and come back to us with a completed kumbaya package that better manages this relationship and make sure everyone is treated fairly. And so that's what you have before you. Senate Bill 927 is the result of the work group that we created last session to resolve all the possible disputes between our truckers, our independent truckers, and our towers. And so let me give you some other shout outs. Not only did we do this in the style of Senator Middleton, he also represents the independent truckers. And so I want to thank him for making this happen. And then Andrea Mansfield represents the towers who were very thoughtful in how they came to this issue and made sure that their rights were protected. And so, and then let me thank Delegate Linda Foley. This kumbaya moment was mostly worked out on the House side. And that's partially why the bill came a little late to this committee. They worked it out and then we cross-filed the bill here in the Senate. So with that, I would ask for a favorable report for Senate Bill 927.
Excellent. Well, thank the Lord. Is this true? Is this actually true? I'm seeing lots of nodding heads. That's great. Well, good job on you. And Senator Walsh, what you said was absolutely true. The first thing I did when I became chair was I sat down with Senator Middleton. Yeah, great mentor and friend. So anyway, congratulations on this, and we'll look forward to moving it forward. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, that'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 927. We'll now move on to Senate Bill 944. Senator Walsh-Reichert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a historic building in my legislative district. It has an easement on it. And that building is being redeveloped. Everyone is on board to remove the easement, including the easement holder. The bill is late because we believed that that could be done without legislation. And we learned belatedly that the bill could only be done with legislation. There is no cross file. And so we can't wait for a House version for this bill to come over. So this, there is some emergency nature to the bill in front of you. It simply removes the easement with everyone in agreement that the easement should be removed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm on the Maryland Historical Trust. I'm one of the senators appointed to be on the trust. So, and there are times when the trust takes a vote to remove easements. Why does this need to be done by a bill through the General Assembly as opposed to pressing the case before the members of the Maryland Historical Trust?
So my understanding is that the Maryland Historical Trust supports removing the easement. They are the beneficiary of the easement and support its removal. Why no vote was taken, I couldn't answer.
So they support removing it, but they think this is the appropriate way to do it.
So if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, PJ Hogan, who was referenced earlier, represents our Park and Planning Commission and has been involved in the technical aspects about whether this does or does not require legislation. And so I'll defer to him.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I've been looking forward to subjecting you to cross-examination for years.
Now's your chance.
I get that pleasure about 4 or 5 times a session on the floor. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, PJ Hogan, I represent the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. As Senator Walsh-Reichert pointed out, we thought this could have been done simply through a prior authorization removal of the easement. I went through bill draft, I went through DLS's capital group, and they said, no, it's in the folio and land record, and it needs to be taken off. And that's exactly what this bill, it even references the parcel record, and that's where it needs to be removed. As Senator Walsh-Reichert said, this has been agreed upon by Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Montgomery County Government, the Maryland Historical Trust, and the Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission will oversee the future of the property. It's more of the property that is a park that will remain a public park going forward. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, seeing no further questions, that'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 944. Senator Muse, you're up next with Senate Bill 967. You ready to go?
Just in case you have a question. Thank you very much. I think that this is the last bill you'll hear from me this year. Isn't that wonderful? Woohoo. Senate Bill 967, Public Safety Statewide DNA Database Systems. I do have one person who's here who can answer some questions if you have them, and I'll get that. I think it's I know Daniel Katz is here, and one other that he'll introduce. This bill was developed in conjunction with the Maryland States Attorneys Association, the Maryland State Police, and other stakeholders from the District Court and Parole and Probation Office. As you'll read in the Maryland State Police testimony, for years, their crime laboratory has worked diligently to ensure that all DNA samples that are submitted for testing are done so in compliance with the law. But some factors are out of the control of the state police and their lab. For instance, samples that should be collected for submission are being missed, and individuals are refusing to provide samples because there is no penalty. This attempts to change some of that. So it would address these issues by doing the following: change the circumstances in which the DNA samples are collected and stored. Number two, change the individuals required to collect DNA samples, and it would clarify when a DNA sample may be tested or placed in the statewide DNA database. SB 967 would also prohibit a person from refusing to provide a DNA sample if they violate this requirement. I spoke to the Maryland State Police and asked them. There was one problem I had with the bill. I don't like creating new sentences and in that respect. So there's an amendment that would replace what you see as the first time violator of, I believe it's 590 days in jail. And then for the second, I'm going to replace that with an amendment that says first time offense would be $500 fine, second offense, $1,000 fine. So we don't create any jail records for anyone else. There's a couple of reasons that I'm really involved with this. And the power of the DNA database is a tool that can be used not only to implicate persons who are guilty of crimes, but it can exonerate persons. It can exonerate the innocent. For example, if an innocent person is being held awaiting trial or has been falsely convicted without being connected to the crime with DNA, a database hit to an actual perpetrator in the case can be the basis for the innocent person to be immediately released. Therefore, the stronger that we make the DNA database, the more potential there is to help to exonerate the innocent. In addition, Maryland State Police will expunge all of the in limbo samples, even though some of them could be eligible to be tested after fixing the arrangement. Therefore, for these reasons, I urge this committee to give a favorable report. And Mr. Dan Katz, I know you come right here if you have any other questions related to the DNA and to the database and how this works. And he is the director of the Forensic Science Division for the Maryland State Police, and we're putting this bill in on their behalf. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you. And I don't forget. Good. How are you? Question for you.
You come right in.
Hi, Senator.
Now, how you doing, sir?
Good.
And thank you for all your help with the forensic genealogy.
You're welcome.
Work as well. On page 2, it puts in brackets number 2, an individual who was convicted of a felony or violation. It goes on I'm curious with the removal of that language, is this an attempt to broaden who's eligible to have DNA swabs taken?
No, sir. This is not, all this is trying to do is clarify things that are not necessarily so clear in the law. So in regards to what you were referencing, page 2.
Mm-hmm. Lines 3 through 7 is what I was.
3 through 7. Oh, I see where you're. Okay, so what that is when this was put into, when this went into law, there were older instances of individuals who were already in the correction system prior to DNA being, the DNA data being around. So this was sort of a retroactive back then, and it's no longer
I don't need it
applicable.
now.
So we're just taking it out. It's
Okay.
just, that's all it is.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
The chair, you want this move for favorable now that you have a chair? Let's just get it over with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just quickly reading through the opposition of the judiciary. And they say it's inappropriate to require members of the judiciary to take these samples, that ought to be the function of somebody else. Is that changed by the amendment, or is that still in the bill?
Good afternoon, committee. I'm Michael Brady with the Maryland State Police. And Senator, that's a great question, one that we weren't aware of until we read that opposition letter.
Right.
I've worked with Chief Judge Morrissey, and we have an agreement that the sheriff's office is already in a circuit court, but they're not in the district court. So we were trying to capture that. He has agreed that upon sentencing, one of the terms will be that the accused or sentenced at that point has to go to circuit court to submit the sample. So it will be through the sheriff's department and not through any of the court officials.
Okay, will you submit an amendment to that effect to the committee?
Yes, we were working on that.
Great, thank you.
I'll close with this, I misspoke, let me get this straight. The first offense would not exceed $1,000 and the second offense would not exceed $2,500, but this would not require jail time and et cetera, which is not what we wanted to create, and everyone agreed to that. Now I have that amendment to you. Having said that, I hope to get a favorable report.
And mentioning that section, I'm just curious how often, and maybe Mr. Brady knows, how often are people saying we're not giving you samples?
Is it often that they're not giving samples or the percentage of?
I can't give you an absolute number, but as people are refusing, then they tell their friends, oh, I refused and nothing happened. So it's becoming more and more prevalent.
How do they refuse? I mean,
They just say, no, we're not going to use force to take it from them.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
All right, excellent. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Senator Muse. That'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 967. We'll now move on to Senator Washington, and we'll go with Senate Bill 904. Since you are not Senator Washington, if you could just enter your name for the record, please.
I
Thanks.
will. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Sam Jackson, here on behalf of Senator Alonzo Washington to testify in support of Senate Bill 904. Here in Maryland, there are countless homeowners under economic strain who are in desperate need of legal assistance in order to navigate the complex foreclosure process. Right now, Maryland is sixth in the nation for rates of serious mortgage delinquency. Thousands of these homeowners already struggling to make ends meet will soon be involved in foreclosure proceedings, but do not have the funds required to pay an attorney. To address this issue, we've introduced Senate Bill 904, which establishes access to legal representation for vulnerable individuals to work through foreclosure proceedings. The Access to Counsel and Foreclosure Proceedings AFCP program, administered by the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, will direct services and resources to provide all covered individuals with access to legal representation. The bill also establishes the ACFP Special Fund, administered by the MLSC, and requires the clerk of the circuit court to collect fees on each residential property sale. This program must be phased in over time as determined by MLSC with the goal of being fully implemented by 2027. MLSC also stands in full support of this legislation and has submitted written testimony. We know the positive effect of providing free counsel to those in legal proceedings, particularly when something as fundamental as housing is at stake. And right now, the need in our state spreads beyond the capability of the legal services providers currently representing at-risk homeowners. Senate Bill 904 will bridge this gap to ensure that all homeowners have the resources they need to work through foreclosure proceedings. For these reasons, I ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 904.
Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, that'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 904. We'll now go on to Senator Washington, Senate Bill 961.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, my name is Sam Jackson here on behalf of Senator Alonzo Washington, here to testify in support of Senate Bill 961. This bill would extend the time period in which a law enforcement agency is required to mail citations for violations recorded by school bus monitoring cameras from 2 weeks to 30 days. The current 2-week time restriction inhibits courts from fully processing citations for all school bus stop armed traffic violations. In order to fully process a citation from a violation recorded on a school bus monitoring camera, the vendor has to first gather data from the equipment under the school system's control, prepare it, and then send it to law enforcement. Local law enforcement then has to review the data and determine whether to issue the citation, and then must get it to the Postal Service. Senate Bill 961 would put the state of Maryland in line with New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Virginia, Connecticut, and other states nearby, which all have windows longer than 14 days. We're just not doing anything groundbreaking here. We're just meeting a national standard. This change in statute would allow adequate time for the additional steps needed in the school bus camera process that the other automated ticketing enforcement programs do not have to deal with, including breaks in the school calendar, holidays, and limited business hours of transportation or security services departments. For these reasons, I respectfully request a favorable report on Senate Bill 961.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, with that, that'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 961. We'll now move on to our final bill of the day, Senate Bill 949, Senator Folden. Is someone here to present the bill on the senator's behalf? There you go. There you go. That's right. That's right.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. Alicia Lockhart, Chief of Staff for Senator Folden, calling here to present Senate Bill 949, Criminal Injuries Compensation Board Victims of Non-Fatal Strangulation. This bill expands Sexual Assault Reimbursement Unit of the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services to provide reimbursement for non-fatal strangulation exams of intimate partner violence and child abuse victims. On October 1st, 2020, strangulation became a felony, first-degree assault in Maryland. This necessary and needed change to the law occurred in part to the serious potential long-term medical consequences of strangulation, brain damage, organ failure, and stroke. Strangulation is a particularly lethal form of intimate partner violence, as unconsciousness can occur within seconds and death in under 2 minutes. Research shows that if a woman has been strangled by her partner even once, she is 750% more likely to be murdered by him in the future. Further, those who commit mass shootings and shoot police officers often have a history of domestic violence and strangulation. As a result of this change in the law, strangulation protocols and trainings have occurred throughout the state, and victims are now undergoing examinations necessary for proper medical treatment and essential evidentiary collection necessary for effective prosecution of the predators. An unforeseen consequence, however, is that the victims are being held financially liable for these examinations, or worse. They are refusing the treatment due to other financial hardships or fear that their abuser may discover they underwent an examination if it is reported to their insurance. Medical examinations and forensic documentation following a strangulation event are not only potentially life-saving, but they are invaluable prosecutorial tool that enhances felony conviction rates. In about 50% of strangulation cases, there is no visible external injury. One of the reasons that it is preferred tactic of perpetrators, apologize. Where there is injury, it is often subtle, and identifying it requires advanced forensic nursing training in order to properly document and explain findings, to judge or jury. If victims do not seek care, either because they do not have the ability to pay or because they fear that their abusive partner will find the insurance bill, they are not safe and justice is not done. No one should feel financially responsible for trauma or violence associated with strangulation. We want victims to feel they will get fair treatment regardless of their socioeconomical status. For this, we would ask for a favorable report.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, with that, oh, everyone's got a question. Yeah.
Yes, should this be the case? That we should all ask Senator Folden to give her a raise for the great job she's done.
Oh, yes, I think that's right. I think it's
Thank you.
automatic
Senator, I
ex-
appreciate
escort
it.
above. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, have a good one.
Boy, yeah.
With friends like you, I don't know, man. All right. With that, that'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 949 and the hearings for the day. That's it. Boom.